So within a year after Zama, Rome and Carthage declare peace and they make a treaty, but it's basically Rome that won the Battle of Zama, and it's Rome that won the Second Punic War, and it's Rome who gets to make the rules for how this treaty goes. So it's not so great for Carthage. Carthage is told that they cannot keep their fleet of ships, they lose their navy. And they have to pay huge amounts of money to Rome in reparations for all the trouble that they caused. And they also lose all of the land that they had control over, with the exception of the area right around Carthage. So that's not good for Carthage. And they're told they are not allowed to wage war without having permission from Rome. So Rome is all about having control over Carthage. But Rome isn't in the best of shape either. They lost a lot of men, soldiers and senators, people who were being in charge of the soldiers, soldiers who themselves had been farmers once and who cannot farm anymore. And Italy itself was devastated by all of these battles. And so literally they had armies marching up and down it, fighting against each other. There is a lot of work they need to do to get it back to the productive levels that it had been before the Second Punic War. But Rome is emerging as the dominant power in the Mediterranean. Their holds over various lands are increasing. They have more access to resources, natural resources, money, etc. They have more control over people. They can make more people slaves, which is a terrible thing, but does give them power. And so, things seem pretty good on the upside for Rome. But interestingly enough, with regards to Hannibal, even though he was considered one of Rome's worst enemies, most powerful generals that they faced, in a way, they actually really show by what they write about him, by how they describe him, that they really kind of respected him as a general. They were afraid of him for sure, but they also definitely had this respect for how good he was at making his army follow him and be successful in battle, often when their odds were technically, as far as numbers were concerned, against them. Um, Another part of that is just that, if you are almost beaten by a crappy general, that doesn't look really good for you. But if you're like, whoa, that enemy was legit. He almost beat us. And because he was so good and we respect him, oh, well, then the fact that we beat him, that makes us seem even better. So it is kind of a two-sided thing for why the Romans may have respected him so much and written about him with such respect and fear. Interestingly enough, the Second Punic War is often known as the Hannibalic War by the Romans because he played such a big part in it. So, Second Punic War ends, and for a time, there's peace until the Third Punic War. So we had about 50 years of good peace. Maybe if you were lucky enough to be born in that time, things went pretty well for you as a Roman. But the Third Punic War starts in 149. And again, there have been long-standing quarrels between the Carthaginians and this guy named Massinissa, who is the king of the Numidians. So if I scroll down even a smidge more, ooh, I jumped there. We've got Carthage over here. We've got Numidia over here. There was a king named Massinissa. And you can imagine that not being that far away, they certainly would come into contact with them. And for a time, Carthage had control or slash was allies with these people, but it didn't totally last, unfortunately. And Carthage ends up attacking Numidia. But remember, part of the treaty of the Second Punic War was that Carthage was not allowed to attack an enemy without Rome's permission. And so Rome sees this as an excuse for war and goes and attacks Carthage. So were they just looking for an excuse? Do they just kind of want to finally stamp out the Carthaginians? Probably. And so begins the Third Punic War. But the Romans start out in a better position. They are on the offensive. They literally just go and besiege. They attack, put troops around, don't let anybody out, don't let resources go in, and they besiege the city of Carthage for 2 years. And finally, under the command of Scipio Aemilianus, this is a grandson, but technically not by hereditary grandson, but actually by adoption, which was a thing that the Romans actually did quite often. So, sort of grandson of Scipio Africanus. He comes along and he is leading the Romans. And with him in the lead, they are able to force their way inside of Carthage. They kill thousands of Carthaginians, men, women, children. They enslaved thousands of others. We study the Romans, and in some ways, sure, we respect the fact that they were able to expand, that they did create a powerful empire, that they did come up with cool technological things, but they were also kind of terrible in a lot of ways. For example, finding an excuse to fight against this enemy that they've never liked, killing thousands, enslaving thousands, and totally destroying the city after 50 years of what had been halfway decent peace. So in come the Romans. Just because we study them doesn't mean they're our right. But this is how the Third Punic War went, and they end up winning it pretty decisively. After the Third Punic War, Rome refers to Carthage's former territory as Africa. That is where that term comes from for the continent. And at the same time, basically in 146, while part of the Roman army is attacking Carthage, another part is fighting over in Greece, and they destroy a city called Corinth, kind of right over in here. And in some ways, this is when Rome really is starting to expand and get power. But some even ancient historians of the time would also say that this was the start of Rome's moral decline, where Rome is really starting to get too big and too interested in having power over others and increasing that power and taking over other land. And it's also a time when individuals are starting, like, so generals are getting more power over the soldiers that follow them than, say, the elected officials that are supposed to be running the country. And you start to have a succession of strongmen, men who want to gain power for Rome, but also gain a lot of power for themselves and wealth for themselves. So the Third Punic War, we've gotten to a point where Rome has changed their fighting styles. We've gotten to a point where the territory that Rome has increased significantly, and perhaps we're starting along the slippery slope to Rome declining morally. And within, well, 120 years or so, we'll find that the Roman Republican model of government is starting to lose its power. And we'll talk more about that later. So thank you for listening. There are questions on Google Classroom for you to answer about some of the more detailed bits of the First, Second, and Third Punic War and its effects that I would like you to answer. Thanks all. Walete.